So since we are still early in 2025, I want to briefly talk about the 10 wars, hotspots, or potential conflicts we should be paying attention to this coming year. And I may throw in a couple of honorable mentions. Now, before I begin, I want to highlight that it seems kind of gross to rank wars because the suffering caused by them is very real to those on the ground. And there is a definitive impact no matter whether you're number 1 on this list or number 10. But I'm still going to put these in order of what I believe is the most impactful to the United States and the collective West. So starting off with number 10, we have the Sahel region of Africa, which is just south of the Sahara Desert. There's a band that runs laterally across the continent encompassing multiple countries and is called the Sahel. The main problem is jihadist insurgencies, some of which are supported by Russian mercenary groups like Wagner Group. Political instability in countries like Niger and Mali continue to plague the region. There's weak governance, and climate change is pulling the Sahara Desert further south, impacting resources and threatening to turn the Sahel into a hotspot for extremism. One specific country that is grappling with the impact is Sudan, which is dealing with a devastating war between the Rapid Support Forces and the army. There have been millions displaced, and the country is on the brink of famine. Without urgent action, the already vulnerable Sudanese people risk violent partition and regional chaos. Number 9, Myanmar. Myanmar's military junta clings to power despite losing significant territory to rebel forces. China has propped up the junta, fearing instability brought by a civil war in Myanmar, but elections planned for 2025 are likely to spark more violence than solve anything. Ethnic tensions and resource-driven conflicts, such as control over rare earth mines and port systems, further complicate the picture. China's involvement is uncertain, as regardless of what they do, whether they are more involved or less involved, violence is likely to increase anyway. Myanmar's future remains fraught with uncertainty and upheaval. Number 8, Syria. After decades of brutal rule by Bashar al-Assad, his dictatorship has finally fallen, offering hope for Syria's recovery. But the challenges are immense. Rebel forces led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham control the capital of Damascus, but struggle with governance, sectarian tensions, and overstretched resources. Minority groups fear persecution given HTS's terrorist background, and threats from Israeli strikes to Turkish-backed forces loom large. Meanwhile, Western sanctions continue to block vital aid as we try to sort out what exactly is going on in that country, which is making Syria's path to stability precarious. Number 7, Haiti. Haiti remains gripped by gang violence and political instability, with a weak transitional government and an under-resourced Kenyan-led security force unable to restore order. Elections are unlikely amid the chaos, and gangs continue to expand their control in the country. The call for a stronger UN peacekeeping mission grows louder, but the risks of further destabilization remain high without a clear strategy. Calls for stronger military support from the United States will likely fall on deaf ears within the Trump administration, so do not expect any meaningful peace anytime soon. Number 6, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and somewhat India. South Asia faces a volatile triangle of instability. In Afghanistan, the Taliban's rule has deepened humanitarian and sectarian violence, with ISIS-K and other groups threatening regional stability. Pakistan is grappling with economic collapse, political turmoil, and rising violence from the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan terrorist group, or TTP, who are emboldened by Afghan militants that continue to conduct attacks into Pakistani territory. Pakistan responds with military airstrikes in Afghanistan, but the fight continues. Meanwhile, India faces escalating tensions with Pakistan over Kashmir and growing concerns about China's regional influence. The interplay of terrorist extremism as well as geopolitical rivalries is creating instability that could spark a wider conflict. Number 5, Israel and Palestine. So I've separated these from Syria as well as the other potential conflict that I talk about later on in this list for obvious reasons. Israel has taken decisive action against Hamas in Gaza, aiming to dismantle the group responsible for ongoing attacks and ensuring the safety of its citizens. However, the issue remains where the line should be drawn regarding the amount of destruction they wrought upon the Palestinian people in their attempts to completely destroy Hamas. In the West Bank, Israel is advancing measures to strengthen its territorial control and address long-term security concerns at the expense of the Palestinian people. The United States is a key ally here, but with Trump coming online, there is likely going to be a loosening of restrictions on Israel. Efforts for peace could benefit from the Gulf states leveraging their influence, but Israel's actions reflect a pretty unshakable determination to protect its sovereignty and its citizens. Unfortunately, the Palestinian cause is not being helped when Hamas continues to hold hostages and just today killed 3 Israelis on a bus in the West Bank, so violence is likely to continue. Number 4, the Korean Peninsula. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has declared South Korea as his primary foe, aligning closely with Russia and deploying troops to Ukraine to fight. In return, Korea is receiving advanced missile technology from Russia to enhance its nuclear capabilities and emboldening Pyongyang. Meanwhile, political turmoil in South Korea following the failed coup adds instability. The risks of miscalculation here loom large, with provocations coming from North Korea as they test U.S. commitments to regional security. They also continue to fire missiles towards Japan, who is growing increasingly impatient with North Korea's belligerence. Now, some honorable mentions before I get to the top three. Venezuela. Venezuela continues to grapple with economic collapse and political deadlock between President Maduro's government and opposition forces. This has led to an ongoing humanitarian crisis and mass migration, straining neighboring countries. Efforts to mediate internationally remain stalled, while millions of Venezuelan refugees create further instability in the region, and small pockets of violence have popped up. Second honorable mention, U.S. versus the Mexican drug cartels. Now, Mexico's drug war rages on, fueled by U.S. demand for fentanyl and escalating cartel violence. Trump's hardline stance threatening tariffs, mass deportations, and even military strikes if Mexico doesn't do anything adds tension to an already strained relationship. Trump may deploy military assets to interdict and destroy cartels supplying fentanyl, possibly without Mexico's permission. Such actions would damage the critical economic ties between the two countries. Now back to the list, we have number 3, which is Iran versus the US and Israel. Iran's regional power is declining with significant setbacks such as the fall of Syria's Assad and the weakening of Hezbollah after devastating Israeli airstrikes. These losses disrupt Tehran's strategy of using proxies to project influence, leaving the regime increasingly isolated. At the same time, Iran's nuclear program is advancing rapidly with its breakout time now virtually non-existent, raising alarms in both the US and Israel. Military strikes to halt their progress are on the table, especially in Israel, but such action risks igniting a broader conflict. Iran could respond with missile strikes on US or Israeli assets in the region, or mobilize additional proxies to conduct terrorist attacks globally. Number 2, US, China, Taiwan, and the broader South China Sea. Now, US-China relations remain fragile, with tensions over Taiwan and belligerents in the South China Sea at the forefront of their rivalry. Under Trump's presidency, unpredictability adds complexity, with potential shifts in tariffs, trade policy, and military strategy. While neither the US nor China wants to have an open conflict, the risk of miscalculation is significant, particularly in sensitive areas like the Taiwan Strait, where China is increasing its military incursions to challenge US commitments to regional security. In the South China Sea, China's aggressive activities targeting neighboring countries like the Philippines and Vietnam heighten the potential for conflict, with nations like the Philippines sharing a mutual defense treaty with the US, which could quickly spiral into a broader crisis with far-reaching global repercussions. Complicating matters further, Chinese President Xi Jinping faces demographic and economic pressures at home, which may prompt him to act more aggressively abroad. Whether China escalates or decides to back off and focus inward will shape the regional and global landscape for years to come. And number 1, which is obvious, Ukraine. Unsurprisingly, Ukraine remains the most critical conflict to watch. The war continues to drag on, with Russian forces advancing slowly despite heavy losses. Ukraine faces a pivotal moment as Western backers grow weary of the prolonged conflict, and U.S. President Donald Trump's policies on the war remain somewhat uncertain. Negotiations are stalled, with territorial disputes and security guarantees as major sticking points. Without sustained international support, Ukraine risks further vulnerability and prolonged conflict. However, Russia itself is inching closer to economic collapse, which could lead to a military collapse and further international isolation. The reason this is number 1 is Ukraine's outcome holds generational implications for U.S. defense and foreign policy. Ensuring that Ukraine is well equipped to resist Russia should remain a top priority for the United States and NATO in 2025. As I've said in previous videos, what happens in Ukraine in 2025 is likely to set the trajectory for the globe for the next decade. Nonetheless, how all of these conflicts evolve or are managed will determine not only the stability of these regions, but also the security and influence of the United States and the West moving forward.